Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Assalamu alaikum, assalamu alaikum. My goodness me, we missed 1 week, subhanallah, and it feels like an age. It's a privilege and a blessing to be here broadcasting live, the Baker Broadcast Show, Newcastle, Fast FM, swiftly touring towards Ramadan, and subhanallah, a great privilege to be broadcasting here live on YouTube, Facebook, and for you sisters and brothers out there. I pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's mercy is upon you, your beloved families, your loved ones, and all things be dear and blessed to you, inshallah. And assalamu alaikum, Dr. Abdul Haqq. It's a real privilege and pleasure to see you again this evening.
Jazakallah khair wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Right, okay, so everybody tuning in, Jazakallah khair, thank you very much. And last week we didn't have a show. Our dear brother Hassan, his father-in-law passed away, and so there was a few things that were going on, and so we took a bit of a break there. And I'm sure you'll remember him and all those that have gone, inshallah, in your du'as. So today, what are we talking about? A royal flush. Get involved in the discussion, like, share, and get your comments in there, inshallah, and get involved with this discussion. A royal flush. So those of you who have seen the Prince Harry interview and with Prince Harry, his wife, Meghan Markle, with Oprah, doing an interview that has had a lot of build-up behind it, a lot of people talking about it, discussing it, and as you may have seen or will have seen and could not really avoid, irrespective of where you are in the world, how that interview has gone down. Now, that hasn't particularly aired here in the UK. I believe it's airing today. However, there's a lot for us to discuss today, inshallah, and that is what we are going to be talking about. The royal flush. Are we seeing a re-emerging of racism? And are we seeing different things around what it means to have certain shifts and structures being challenged? So, Dr. Abdul Haqq, over to you.
Jazakallah khair. The title, A Royal Flush, the reason I thought that was a good title to start with, wa alaikum salam, Malahat, Rahman, good to see you again, and all of those of you who are joining us. And a royal flush, if anyone knows cards, not that we should know all of the card games, a royal flush is a winning hand. Okay, that's what a royal flush means. And with the royal family in question, we see that
can I just say it's all colors of the same card, of the same suit, all in a line, yeah?
See, now, I didn't know that Wajid would know that, and it worries me that he may have been a gambling man back in his day. But
never gamble, bruv. Never gamble, bruv.
Never gamble, but a card player.
But know the rules. Don't gamble, but know the rules.
Excellent, excellent. So that royal flush, that winning hand, can that be applied to the royal family today? Can it be applied to the royal family in the past? And what we see is that a royal flush has a consistency, as Wajid has highlighted, and there's no consistency with the royal family in this instance. There's inconsistencies, in fact. And what I want us to look at is, while we're looking at the topic of the moment, and we see from America that the stats show it's the most viewed interview or screening in history, even bigger than the Super Bowl, because of the topic, because of who it involves and everything. What we're seeing are double standards. We only have to look at Prince Andrew and allegations and accusations that are around him with regards to paedophilia and the circles that he moved in, the very salacious circles that he moved in, and how the royal family jumped in and defended him and put their wing around him to make sure they shielded him from the embarrassment that followed from the interview that he conducted on, I think it was BBC. You've got that happening. You've got other embarrassing sagas happening. You've got Prince Charles, who married his mistress, who he was seeing, long-time mistress, while he was married to Harry and William's mother, Princess Diana. So by no means, no stretch of the imagination, is there a successful formula or consistent platform that the royal family moves upon. So we see racism emerging, Wajid, in this instance, and I say re-emerging because it's been there within the royal family, which is basically another reflection of wider society and the structural racism that exists therein. That's something that's significant. And while we look on that on a macro level regarding that, and we're looking at a family that has inherent racism, and that's coming out now, and we're hearing that in interview from Meghan Markle. We've got to also then look on a micro level within our own families, because how many families, Asian, Arab, and otherwise culturally foundational families, how many other families find resonance with the concerns that were there, Walaikum Salam, floating man, that were there in the royal family, asking about the complexion of the baby that would be born, Archie, what color he would be, moving the descendant further away from any inheritance or any benefits from the family. Walaikum Salam, Sister Amal. How many families are mirrors of what we're seeing and hearing in this interview that's taken place yesterday with Oprah Winfrey? And I would dare say there are a number of families that we know, that we may even be a part of, that resonate, and we'll be saying, well, what's wrong with asking what the complexion of the child is? Well, we don't want a dark child. We don't want any blackness in our family.
Yeah, you know, to get into that, Walaikum Assalam to Noah, Partha, RB, Floating Man, Jassim, Sister Amal, Bia, Rahman, Rahma, and Tahseen. Alaikum Assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. You know, you're really touching on something here, because I think the problem is we kind of look outwardly, and it's very easy to point fingers and say this is the situation. Now, where I come from in Kashmir, in Pakistan, my family is all colors, like literally all colors, right? We live in an area where some of my cousins will have green eyes and like fair skin and light skin, and some of us get really dark skin. But that's the diversity in the sense of the skin tone and stuff. But again, you're right. Those that have the darker skins are ridiculed. They are mocked. Yeah. And I think what we are seeing, though, Walaikum Salam Khan, is this inward kind of family. Well, this family, which is always in the social media, like it's always been there. I mean, you know, if you go back before all of this, you know, Prince Harry talked about what happened to his mother, how the media pursued his mother. And that was one of the reasons why he's always hated the media, was because of that that way of relentless storytelling and aggressive kind of storytelling and just pulling things apart and putting things in the spotlight, how they chose it. Walaikum Assalam, Fatima. They manipulated whatever they could, put forward whatever they could. They were always looking for chinks in that. And so now his hatred is there anyway, right? But again, like you said, inwardly within that family, when he's turned to them for support, from what I've seen from the interview, that support hasn't been there, and that structure hasn't been there. And I think these are tough conversations for any family, right? Even though we're living in the 21st century, and there are various things that have been going on, especially over the last year. I mean, we're coming up to a year since George Floyd scenario happened live on TV. That's what we're talking about, being live, not a one-off situation, but something that is an ongoing issue. But we saw it, you know, the 9 minutes and so many seconds of somebody being put down and sadly, you know, dying because of the brutality of it all. So when we kind of look at the different sections of all of this, there is a lot around sort of where the social media comes into it, in the sense of the gossip or where the hot story is. But like you said, there's a strong inward thing we need to have to reflect within ourselves, because ultimately we've all got biases, though, right? Dr. Abdul Haqq, we've all got them within us. So where is the balance then for ourselves?
See, you said a good point there. You've referred to bias. Yeah, we can have biases. but we're talking about racism here, latent racism. And you could see that when Harry was with Meghan, the microaggressions, the intonations in the media concerning her, and the angry black woman trope that is thrown out against black women a lot of the time. And my point is this: while we're looking at that, and it's going to be discussed, and it hasn't aired in the UK yet. I haven't seen it. I've got it. My wife has watched the interview and got a copy there for me to watch and everything. We've got to look at the parallels. We've got to look in the mirror, because this is not unusual. This is happening. It doesn't have to be the royal family that this takes place in. This is taking place in our own families, on our own doorsteps. And I want to say this as well. I want everyone to look into the history of man, and we're not going to go back to the age-old story of Iblis and him being the first to be racist or xenophobic and everything. If you go back far enough in history, and it's not too far, we can go back to the 1600s, okay, 17th century, you'll see that racism of the type that we see today wasn't prevalent. You'll see that black people, aristocracy, existed in England and across Western societies, as well as African and South American societies. We see that with Christopher Columbus, who didn't discover America, but when he got to South America, he found black Muslims already there, and civilizations, not just the black Muslims, other civilizations there. I'm saying this to those who are viewing because we find there's a lot of ignorance amongst the South Asian community, not to mention the white community, not to mention the Arab community, a huge amount of ignorance. And what is prevalent now is that, oh, black people, we need defending because we've been looked upon from a perspective of a post-transatlantic slavery. And as I say often, black history didn't begin with slavery, it was interrupted by it. And if we look at your culture, Wajid, I say respectfully, the South Asian culture, if we look in Asia and we see the presence of black leaders and kings, and that blackness was the symbol of beauty at that time, and you've got white travelers going there and reporting, it's there, it's documented in English, travelers seeing about what the epitome of beauty actually was. When we look at that across the world, when we look at that coming up to the early 17th century, you'll see that. You'll see the Black Madonna. You didn't have this white depiction of Madonna or Virgin Mary as we see in Christianity. You saw black Madonnas. They still exist to this day. The point I'm making is this. We are quite happy to be fed a narrative that informs now not only our racism, but it's permeated our bias as well. Coming back to that term that you've used, Wajid. And I would say, quite frankly, that we need to be looking in the mirror at ourselves, at our families in that particular instance. We need to be looking at, you may be married to an Asian wife, or you may be married to an Asian husband, and you have a child and it's slightly darker and your heart sinks. And we've got to ask ourselves, where is that from? Because no matter how educated you are, no matter how religious you are, you're still ignorant if you have that particular belief. We've got to say that about black couples as well. The black couple might have a darker child and another one that's fairer. And do we favor the one that's fairer, the one that's lighter? Because we have this colonial backward, because that's exactly what it is, backward mentality with regards to our children. So while we're looking at this being played out in the TV now, some people didn't even know Meghan Markle was black. They didn't even know that she had blackness in her. And I'll stop at this particular point. Not only is she black, but she's beautiful. And she's the most beautiful looking in the royal family at the moment. Please don't tell me about Camilla. Please don't tell me about Kate. Kate's not that bad. She's attractive in some eyes and everything like that, unless you're that typical quintessentially white British and you just cannot appreciate any other element of beauty. But she's the most attractive, most beautiful, more than likely the most intelligent in the royal family at the moment. And because of her skin tone, and because she's taken away their young prince, there's that resentment. The media believes that they own Harry. The media believes that they own the royal family. The royal family, therefore, are playing into that media circus in the racism that is there and is inherent amongst them.
I think you what you've touched on there is that this whole thing sits on a foundation that is centuries old, and it's embedded within us, that colonial mentality that is being pushed and, like you said, pressed into us, and we see it. And when I use the word bias, you're right. Jazakallah khair for that. That there is this unconscious bias that gets embedded into us, that gets pushed into us from the moment that we come into this dunya, right? And we kind of fall into line on these things, but we don't look at it in the sense of being able to how to undo it, because the reality is that when structures this big are having these problems, the few little voices that speak up aren't going to make a difference.
No, that's true. But as Pastor has just highlighted there, and there's some really good comments coming in with Octavia saying whitewashing of history. Yes, as a black person, the history has been whitewashed, and it's not history, it's his story. That's exactly what it is. It's his story. And as we know, that history is written by the victorious. But as Pastor's highlighted, if Hassan can put that statement back up again, what about the racism in between Muslims, the ethnic racism? This is what I'm speaking about here, because that's rife amongst us. We've spoken about it many times. I think it's necessary to redress it and speak about it again. And let's do the litmus test. Those of us who've got children, will we marry our children to a different race? And I'm not going to say, so many times people say about black as though that's the ultimate test. Let me be frank to you. Let me be very frank. Those who are non-blacks, white, brown, Asian, non-Asian, who have married into black communities, black men, black women, okay, you'll see that they have found a relationship, a love, an intensity that they did not find amongst their own. And some will say, whoa, but how can you say that? Black women will say the same if they married. That's fine. I'm talking the proud black Muslim, okay? We don't need excuses made for us. We don't need to have a default that all pity or empathy or anything like that. No, I'm proud. Before I was Muslim, I'd be even arrogant with what I'm saying here in this particular instance now, but I'm not, because we can't be arrogant. Sympathy and empathy are not needed. But what I will do as a black Muslim is speak to the racism that we have met amongst Muslim communities who are supposed to know better. The racism we've met when we've looked at the offspring and how they've been viewed by others. Oh, the hair is too curly, straighten the hair. She is too dark. We want her to be lighter. And if there's someone white or lighter, then there's this love for that complexion, because it's a colonial mindset. It's a colonial mindset that has been placed upon us. And we feel that the fairer the person is, the more successful, the better, the more, the higher up they are societally. And this speaks to the ignorance of those individuals, those families. If it be our parents, be it our aunties, be it our uncles, they need to be called out. But the sad thing is, amongst the younger generations, where they think that the black history began, we're fine, Kira, Jazakallah khair, it began from there, and they say, oh, you once used to be slaves. Actually, no, you were once enslaved. The term slave comes from the term Slav. When we look at Slavs, it was the Slavic peoples. It was the white race that were being enslaved by various countries. But we're not going to get into the whys and the wherefores. I'm just trying to redress the balance here, because there's a lot of ignorance around this. Let's move back to the story of Meghan. Let's look back to the articulate nature in which she's speaking. Let's look at when Diana spoke, her late mother-in-law, who she never met, when she spoke. Let's look at the sympathy that was there. Then let's look at later on how Martin Bashir, who interviewed her, brown man, how they started vilifying him. Now, had he been a quintessential white interviewer, I don't think we would hear or see the vilification shortly after that interview. So it's so inherent media, and that's why it's good we've got Newcastle Fast. That's why it's good that we've got alternative media, because we don't need to fit into the narrative of racism that is there when brown people, people of color, speak with such confidence and a self-assuredness, and white communities, the predominant community, tap into that. We don't have to mince our words. We don't have to be apologetic in that particular instance.
See, if I can just, walaikum assalam to Kira, Jazakallah for asking, and Octavia and Salahuddin. So just want to touch on, because you touched about it, the microaggressions, right? Now, if you look at that, what is sometimes referred to as gaslighting, right? You know, these little things that keep getting said, and I know, subhanAllah, like I've not experienced it, I'm not black, right? But I know what I have experienced in the sense of the gaslighting process. And it's constantly there, and it's that constant grinding you down, right? You know, that drops of water that just wind you up, and then everything goes, you know. So that this whole process is there to do that, and I think that it's just consistent and continuous. Like you said, you know, I mean, you can look at the British articles about it, you know, they've drawn them side by side, same newspaper. One's talking about how Kate is affectionately holding her baby bump, and then Meghan is obsessed and egotistical about holding her baby bump, you know, and they're exactly the same thing. And you know, Kate's having this diet, this avocado diet, and it's really, really good for her. And then Meghan's having it, and it's all about this, you know, it's all coming from like people of getting like minimum wage or no wages, you know what I mean? So the way the story gets portrayed, these are actual articles on newspapers. You can go check for yourself if you want to. But the whole idea is that continuous gaslighting to because you see, if you're on the defensive, you're on the back foot all the time, it's very easy to make any kind of progress and move forward. And there's this continuous process that keeps kicking in, and like you'll see discussions being had, and you know, respectfully, the people talking about it, there's nobody black there, never mind being a black woman on these panels discussing these things. I mean, what I'm talking about is leading the discussion on these things. There's one thing being involved in the discussion, but there's one thing actually leading that discussion to be able to bring out the underlying issues, because the system is not being challenged.
The system's not being challenged, but with alternative media, it's had to check itself in some respects. And as one of the participants have said, colonialism never died away. It's just been transformed. Okay, and that is a reality that we're actually looking at. But again, I will come back to the point, we are still affected by that colonialism. Also, Wajid, I think an important thing for myself, and I think people of color, I'm not on the defensive. I don't need to be. And I would say that other black people don't need to be. What we need to do is get ahead of the curve, own what is taking place, own the narrative, and move on with that. So I don't feel, as a black person, as a black Muslim, I no longer am on the defensive in any shape or form. That's not how I choose to live my life. Also, I'm not a victim. Never have been, and refuse to even be depicted as that, because I'm blessed and proud and feel honored with how Allah has made me, and wouldn't want to be made any other way. And I think that those who have that defensive attitude, yes, sometimes it's necessary, but do like what we used to do. Turn that defense into an offensive. And those who are coming to you at a particular perspective will see that they have no room. The armor that you're wearing around you is impenetrable. They cannot come through on that at all. They see that confidence that you have in yourself. They see that self-assuredness that you have in yourself. And it just deflects like the armor. It bounces back onto them, showing them the ignorance that is there with them. You don't dignify their racism. You don't dignify their ignorance. And that needs to happen with family as well. Those of us who are marrying non-white or non-Asian or out of our culture and everything like that, we need to have that dignity and that self-assuredness and that protectiveness on our partner, that they don't even need to feel that they need to feel be defended, because it's already there. That our parents, our fathers, our mothers, our cousins, our brothers who are displaying this ignorance, this racism, feel they become embarrassed because of our self-assuredness, because of our self-confidence, because of us not lowering ourselves to that very demeaning characteristic that is being displayed or put towards us. But I will say this, again, I refer to Malcolm X. You bring that blatantly in front in an aggressive way, the response, if need be, will be even more aggressive, be it verbally or otherwise. Such is the self-assurance that those who are like me carry ourselves.
Walaikum assalam to Badriya and Ibtisam. There's something you talk about there about owning the narrative, right? So there's, I don't know, I see two things. There's one thing about decolonizing, right? Got to break that structure down inside our heads. And then the other side is owning the narrative. And so where do we start with that?
Good question. Owning the narrative is looking at what's out there already and asking yourself, am I going to be defined or shaped by that? Or do I have an altogether different paradigm that doesn't consider that because it's beneath me, because it's too simplistic?
Because there, you see, that's where you touch on where we don't know our history enough to have that foundation sometimes. Do you understand? The idea of decolonization, when you talk about it, is that in order to stand proud of one's heritage, one has to know the depth and the beauty and the extent of that heritage. And I think a lot of that is washed away then, isn't it?
Yeah, if you don't know your own heritage, and as I said, if everyone was to look, and I'm not going to go back to the original man and everything like that, because evidence is there for that. If we look, if the South Asian community looked at their lineage and they saw the extent of blackness and the stature of that blood, and I'm not talking the Indian caste system and everything like that, I'm talking about what preceded that, and they saw the superiority of all types of ethnicities, including black, they will feel ashamed and embarrassed that they've inherited a colonial mindset with regards to hierarchy, with regards to race in that particular instance, and that the scales that they are using are colonial, because it's none other than that. It didn't come and it didn't emanate from our culture and our traditions, be we black, be we brown, or other than that. So owning the narrative means understanding, as you said, understanding exactly where we come from. On a religious point, we can talk about Adam and Hawa and we can speak, but now that's just become for many just a nice story that we tell each other, and we use that as platitudes to say we should be better in that particular instance. But when we're looking at the hard facts and we want to talk in the context of today's society, there's ignorance about what and where we come from, and the influence of other ethnicities, black in this instance, on our own societies, on our own cultures.
Okay, so then, like, so for example, like, you know, trying to catch all the comments. Walaikum salam, tofu. Thank you for joining us this evening, inshallah. So Sister Ramos put a comment there. Diversity is what makes the world so beautiful. How couldn't they see the beauty of being different, subhanAllah? So I think in a lot of ways, right, structures keep the way they are because it allows them to continue doing what they're doing, right? And we've seen that, right? We've seen that, you know, they're not going to see a structural shift in, let's say, America, because what we've realized is actually the whole situation is like that. If they bring one person down, the whole house of cards comes tumbling down. And that's that, they're not going to let that happen. So they all keep that structure. They hold on to it no matter what cost it takes to keep that there. So when you talk about this idea of educating ourselves, yeah, like where is it that it comes from in that space and that place where we we really do understand ourselves. Like over the next week, you know, for myself, for our listeners and our viewers, what's over the next week? What is it that we could be doing to really get our head around this decolonization? Because it requires a lot of introspection, Dr. Abdul Haqq. It takes a lot to be able to look in the mirror and to be able to ask those questions, but to be able to ask them in a way where we are deconstructing ourselves and understanding, like you said, you know, within our deen of Islam, we know the narratives, we know the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, we know the verses of the Quran, but it's endemic within us. It's endemic, and this problem is something that is holding ourselves back. You know, that whole imagery of a crabs in the bucket, right? You know, we'll keep pulling each other down. Nobody's gonna get out in that way. So it's, you know, it's what do we do with that?
What first thing we need to do, we need to step out of our comfort zones. We need to step out of our comfort zones, and we need to look at what those comfort zones are. And if there's nothing wrong with being amongst our own ethnic group, but if being amongst our own ethnic group means ignorance of the others, then there's a problem there, because we're living in a bubble in that particular instance. And I'm not talking about a social distance bubble and the pandemic bubble. I'm talking about an ethnic bubble that we are living in. We've chosen to live in that, and we've become ignorant and blinkered by that. So we need to step out of that. And in this particular climate that we're living in now, no, we can't go and mix with others and everything like this, but we can research, we can look at histories, we can see what's actually taken place. And I'll put this there, for example, why do I say, or many of us say, the black communities are the most degraded, marginalized, and looked down upon in the Western world? You only have to look at the resilience of 400 years of barbaric slavery, brutalization, and we're still here. We're still here. We hear about genocides and other races and ethnicities being wiped out, but we're still here, still kicking back, still progressing. And viewers should ask themselves, how is that? How can they still exist in such a climate? And yet there's the racism and the institutionalized racism, that the apparatus are still in place against them. So much so that in 2020, we can watch a public lynching by the knee of George Floyd. We can see Breonna Taylor being shot in her bed. And we're angry for a while because it's brought to our attention. But we should still ask that question. How is it a race of people who are brutalized to this day can still stand back up, articulate with a voice that we are not going to take this and accept this? And even at the highest rank of society, aristocracy, we see that taking place. And still the voice is saying, this is not going to be what defines us. This is not going to be taking place. So again, answering your question, coming back to your question, seeing it on the news is not enough. And it's not just the negativity that you need to go and search for, and the sad stories and the horrific stories. You need to go and see the greatness of a people who are being oppressed in this way systematically. And you'll see that there's a very, very, very rich history that was robbed and taken from us. And then maybe then we might start understanding the reality that we're living in. Maybe then, after we've stepped out of that comfort zone and we've researched and not done an atypical what the media feeds us, but we've moved that to the side and we move forward with that. One sister, I think Bay put her up, the composition of her family, and she's proud of that. And when you look at the composition of her family and we look back into our own family history, it's going to be very similar to hers, having black, white, brown in their family. This, yeah, Bayrani, thank you for sharing that. Black, white, Asian, Mongolian, and she's proud of that. And if you look at Wajid, I can tell you, I know back in my lineage, and I've got family with those names, Portuguese names in that particular instance, those from Africa, in my lineage through my children's roots, there's Chinese through my other family's roots. They've got aunties and uncles living in Israel. So everyone really needs to take a step back and be humble, because their origins are likely to have all different ethnicities and hues in that particular instance. And the arrogance and racism and bias that they're actually displaying now is upon a very weak and corrupted premise.
Yeah,
For sure.
that's really some. Yeah, subhanallah. Just walaikum assalam, Sister Shabnam, Sister Fatima, and Brother Jordan. Assalamu alaikum for joining us. You've touched on something there in the sense of what we get taught. Again, it's about control, about who controls that narrative. And like you said, we get this idea thrust upon us because it's about who's controlling that narrative. Then, it's about being able to take control of that narrative and speak up and say something. Actually, I'm not going to put up with this. This is unacceptable. This is a wrong behavior. And like you said, genetically, there's that we don't know quite until you start unraveling the DNA and see where that comes from. But inevitably, that has happened. That happened for centuries. People traveled all the time, and families were like this. This is what happened. It's kind of a new kind of concept where this is who you are. This is what you've done. And then the idea that you're mixed race is just two races mixing together. Whereas you're right, there could be, you don't know where that heritage from that side is from and where that heritage from that side is from. And so when we consider where that narrative is, I think, the stronger we can identify with ourselves in that way. Somebody else put up a really intelligent comment that if you identify with our race first, or it's an interesting comment that we identify with our race first and then our deen, then there's a problem. But when we identify with our deen, then our race is part of what we are. It's part of our identity. But ultimately, it comes under that banner. But the issue and the problem we have is our race becomes that biggest part of our identity. And like you said, either in a positive way or in a negative way. And this is where the problem is, that irrespective of whatever the deen is in the person's heart, in the person's actions, speech, behavior, etc., that can all be washed away based on the person's race, or those that lacking in deen can be overlooked based on the basically being fairer skinned.
No, absolutely. And I think we know that ayat in Surah Hujurat, we say it all the time about being made into tribes and nations to know one another. But you do see from some of the religious as well. Okay, and this is a point we need to look at. Let's not be fooled, those of us who have beards, those are our sisters who wear niqabs. It's not absolute that they're the epitome of religiosity. Because amongst some of our scholars, we've heard racism come out from and referring to theological perspectives as well. But what is very, very important, and it's been said by a number of our viewers, if we were truly upon the essence of the deen and what it's teaching us, even if we had these biases on the ones, that's the bias on the one hand, racism that we were aware of or unaware of, if it surfaced, we would rush to the deen and we would feel guilty, like we saw with some of the Sahaba, the one who put his head on the ground for Bilal, to remove that. But we don't. Those of us who were able to remove it will always feel pain and anguish when we saw racism against anyone, not just the minority. We would hate that, we would abhor it, we would resent it. And it would be something that is almost constant there. No, as one of the brothers said, it's sad, we will never be able to remove racism. Talking about it simply doesn't seem to do anything. I disagree with that last part. No, we will continue to talk about it. We will continue to speak about it because it's wrong. It's wrong, and it needs to be spoken about, and it needs to be highlighted. And those who are subject to it need to hear others speak about it, because it will at least give them some acknowledgement that they are not alone, that people are aware of it, that the experiences that they are going through, others are aware of it and are therefore addressing it. We've seen what happens when individuals endure racism or oppression and they think they're the only ones, or they think that they are invisible. And we've heard from the excerpts from Megan's interview. She wanted to commit suicide while carrying her baby. We're now seeing in some of those pictures, when you look more closely, that while she's smiling, her husband is clenching her hand firmly to reassure her, because she is about to fall apart. She's attending public events because if she stays at home, she is vulnerable to committing suicide or self-harm. So when it's not spoken about, when this is put into the background, those who are enduring it, be it bullying, be it racism, be it any type of oppression, being the sisters who are being oppressed in their home, beaten in their home, whatever's taking place, FGM, these oppressive, heinous acts, if no one talks about them, especially with the forums that we have today, then those individuals are being left in the darkness of the spaces that they're in, and those spaces overwhelm them. They overwhelm them. And those who are not strong enough either harm themselves, commit suicide, or have serious mental breakdowns because there's no outlet or there's no acknowledgement by others who might not know them, but they know the reality and the examples and the circumstances that others face. So we need to keep talking about this. We will keep talking about this. It's important to.
And I think as long as it is spoken about, there is some, inshallah, impact, whatever that might be, to be able to say or do something, you know. Sister Shabnam is saying that the more we speak about it, the more the awareness is raised and discussed. If we stay quiet, the poison continues. And it does. It does not only continues, but it spreads.
Yes.
It's almost like giving it a green light by not challenging it. You know, it's like, you know, with your kids, you know, when they get up to something they shouldn't be, if you don't tell them off, they're just going to pursue it more. It's just going to get, you know, it's like, okay, look, you got to stop this now. This, you know, whatever that might be in a light-hearted way, we're talking about it. But this poison that, you know, Sister Shabnam is talking about, it does, it permeates, it spreads. And it's like, oh, well, that person didn't say anything about it. So therefore, it's acceptable. And it becomes something that becomes a norm in a society, in a community, you know. Astaghfirullah al-Azim. You know, somebody saying there that racism is in all tribes of God. I can't pronounce that name. I'm not sure. Olaf. I'm going to go with Olaf, the surname or the second name. But yeah. So what do you say on that then, Dr. Abdul Haqq? Racism.
Yeah, there is xenophobia. I prefer to use the term because we're speaking about racism generally now. I'm not going to get technical, but racism can only be implemented by those who have an authority and a power to do it. But whether it's ethnic racism, whether it's structural racism, but yeah, inherent in all of us is this xenophobia, is this distinguishing on account of ethnicity. Even as mentioned by one of the viewers, the participants, that we have got racism amongst our own kind, okay? Racism amongst Asians, racism amongst black people. It is actually there. Again, it needs to be spoken about, it needs to be highlighted, and we have to realize that this trait is not a godly trait. This trait is not a noble trait. This trait is it reveals the baseness and the ignorance and the lowliness of the one who brings that to the fore. And if we've all got it, it's something that we have to contend with and we have to subdue. It's very important that we actually do that. How many of us do it regularly? I don't know. How many of us are aware of it? I don't know. But when these discussions come to the fore and we see what's happening with public figures in that particular instance, yes, we can point the finger and talk about them, and we should, but we have to check ourselves at the same time as well. Have we had a concern for when a baby's going to be born, our own child? We have, unfortunately, in the patriarchy that we live in and the misogyny that's prevalent amongst us, we have, our wives are expecting. How many of us have wished and wanted that it's a boy that's going to be born if we haven't had a son. And then we have that description of the man when the child is a girl that's born in the Quran, that his face becomes ashen and he's looking around, is anyone going to see him, because he doesn't want that child. Okay, we're not doing is it infanticide? We're not killing our children alive and burying them now. But how many of us are like that? How many of us have those particular traits there? Okay, it's very important that we check ourselves. You know, today's what is it? It's the day of the Women's Day today in that particular instance. And while we're talking about racism, we've got to look at oppression that is meted out. And black women get a double whammy. Black women get a double whammy. Black Muslim women get a triple whammy. Okay, so we've got to look at that, and no one knows. I don't care how empathetic you may feel you are as a sister, brown sister, white sister, whatever. Being a black Muslim practicing woman in the world today has got to be one of the biggest challenges just to exist. Being a woman in and of itself, of virtue, is difficult enough today. So we cannot fathom how challenging it is just to be yourself.
Oh, you back?
I'm back.
Lost you there for a second. Sorry, you were saying it's challenging be yourself. That's where we lost you.
Yes. Being yourself today as a Muslim woman, being a black Muslim woman, is difficult enough as it is. Is difficult enough as it is. So when we are talking about racism from a remote place, we've got to remember that within our circles, there are those who are enduring it, the microaggressions, daily, especially black women, especially black Muslim women. And
SubhanAllah.
Sorry about that.
All right.
Am I back?
Yeah, I can't see you though.
Hopefully you'll see me in a moment.
Sorry, Dr. Haqq, but your screen is literally going black.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you, yeah.
Right, let me see what's actually going on here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to ring back in. Carry on. I'm going to ring back in.
Yeah, all right, carry on, inshallah. Yeah, just in the meantime, I just want to say wa alaikum assalam to Ria. And yeah, Istiaq, I hope not, inshallah. I hope Dr. Abdul Haqq will be back with us in just a moment. But he's raising something that's quite poignant, in the sense that, you know, we can hear of these experiences, but these, what we're talking about, is those lived experiences and those microaggressions that keep kicking in and that influence a person. But also the idea that we never, until subhanAllah, you never experienced racism until you became Muslim. And we see that a lot more. We're seeing that in a rise and so many different things. But like Dr. Abdul Haqq is saying, what's called intersectionality. So there's different levels of ways that our identity compounds itself when it becomes a barrier for what we are able to do with ourselves. But we were just touching on there this idea of where we talk about wa alaikum salam. Welcome back, Dr.
Thank you.
But just this idea of, you know, when you talk about this like self-empowerment, really, in the sense of decolonize, because that's what it is. When you can decolonize ourselves, inshallah, we kind of disempower those structures that hold us down, you know. It's like if I was a Millwall fan and I got up to no good, which some Millwall fans did not so long ago, yeah. Another football team took the knee, they started shouting racist abuse, and the club was able to distance itself and say, no, these people aren't from us, you know, and so, you know, that's it. But as Muslims, we're all carrying the flag for Muslims. We're all representatives of this deen. You know, it takes one Muslim to say something. It's like, see, that's your lot talking. It's like, and then if you say something contradictory or something that somebody else doesn't like, well, one of your lot said this, therefore you're wrong. You're not even entitled to have a contradictory opinion on things. So where do we as Muslims then find that within the perspective of our deen, find that strength of empowerment of becoming unshackled by that which is the dunya around us, by being truly slaves of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala?
Interesting question, because one thing we need to know is that we can't take on the mantle of some of those who are facing that oppression unless we are from them. We can support, we can challenge, we can show solidarity, but we can't take it on. And what do I mean by that? And I'm saying this, I wanted to say this before we get cut off, and it's quite controversial what I'm saying here. I remember in the 80s, where, before I was Muslim, obviously, that whenever there was an issue amongst the minority South Asians in the area that I lived in, they would call upon us and say, we are black together. But then when there were issues pertaining to us, they distinguished themselves on account of ethnicity. And that's a reality. And that was a good lesson for me back then. Because when I see that term BAME, B-A-M-E, communities, I don't accept that. When I see brown, non-black, but non-white coming under this umbrella saying we're black, I don't accept that. Because black looks like me and different shades of me, not you. So in that instance, you may be able to empathize, support, show solidarity with my plight, if I see it as a plight, if you see it as a plight. But you can never say we, unless of course, it is spoken as Muslims. So for example, when I speak of the Uyghurs, I say we, because they're oppressing Muslims. When we talk about Kashmir and other communities, I say we, because we're talking about a construct that is overarching of any ethnic background or composite structure. But the moment we start talking culturally, the moment we start referring ethnically, the we, without the religion, dissipates. And we've seen that we've been divided on those grounds before, even as Muslims. The Arabs were never called white and considered white until the 1950s, thereabouts, when the predominant global race, being the Caucasians, America in this instance, and the Brits, said, you are white like we are. The Irish were not considered white initially when they were in chattel slavery in America and they were indentured slaves, until they needed to distinguish between blackness and whiteness because of the commodity and the commoditization, of black people. And that's when the Irish became white. So when we look on these lines and we don't look on the religious lines, none of you can say we with me. But if we speak on religious terms sincerely, and it's not just lip service, that your daughter is married to his daughter, my daughter is married to a white individual or brown individual, and I've got absolutely no issue with that at all because of the religion, only then can we say we. Only then. So when Muslims are talking around, and we saw some Muslims kept quiet with the George Floyd thing, all lives matter, they're racist. I'll call you out. If any of you are watching this show now, you're racist because you did not understand the import of Black Lives Matter, not the organization, not the movement, the cause. Any of you who said all lives matter, any of you who deflected and said, what about the Uyghurs? What about Kashmiris? What about the Palestinians? At that moment, you're not with us. You're not with black people. You're not even with Islam by making that call there. You are anti-blackness. And that's what's taking place now, as we see in the media. And any Muslim who is speaking in this way, like, oh, what's wrong with them asking about the baby of Meghan and everything like this? You're racist. You are racist. Unless you speak from a platform of religion, unabashedly, unashamedly, you are not with me. You are not of me. You cannot represent me. You have no empathy for me. You're racist. You have a trait of racism in you. When it's religious, you will speak for everyone. You will speak for anyone who's being oppressed, unhesitatingly, without second thought, because your religion, our religion, says to stand up against oppression. You will not give it a second thought. You will not say all lives matter. You will never say that. You will speak at the moment to that particular cause. And that also goes for black people. If we dismiss now, when the Black Lives Matter issue has abated a little bit, it hasn't gone away, it will never go away. But we're seeing a genocide taking place in China. We then need to speak to that with the same vocal manner and vociferous nature that we're speaking about Black Lives Matter, because it's raised its head in that particular instance. And then let's go to Myanmar. Those who were saying, oh, look what's happening in Myanmar, it's really sad, it's really bad and everything like that. Yeah. What should we be saying? We should be saying, okay, that is bad, but the same people who are calling for support and everything now remained mute when the Rohingyas were being their own people, their own ethnic minority who were Muslim. Let's not get it twisted. Let's not forget how racism works. Very important, these points I'm making now. And some may not like what's being said, but you want to be of me all the time. Be about supporting blackness all the time, where blackness needs to be supported. And I'll be frank, blackness doesn't need to be supported. It just needs to be highlighted when the oppression is remaining prevalent and we are remaining quiet.
Yeah, because there was, Jazakallah khair, Dr. Abdul Haqq, because there was something you said there, and I just wanted to bring that up in the sense of what you've just finished off there. You know, that you use the word plight, but before when we were talking, that it isn't a plight for you. It's you. You know, it's how you turn that defensive into an offensive, and it's that, because we need that mentality, like you said. You know, we need to speak up on behalf of the ummah when that's needed. We need to speak up on behalf of those that are oppressed when it's needed, and it's a mindset that needs to shift. Then, you know, we need to be able to think like that in order to be able to progress to that space of thinking. Just then, like literally unlocking the chains inside our own heads and be able to spill out into these spaces. And I think the other thing is, Dr. Abdul Haqq, is where these discussions can happen. Now, when they talk about, you know, Meghan, they talk about her as if, oh, she's just come out and said all these things, but she didn't. She turned to people for help. She turned and asked, you know, she said, this is happening, this is happening. I need support in this and I need support in that. And none of it was there. None of it was there. And I think a lot of this conversation, all of this conversation would have been a completely different one if she had been embraced, encouraged, and like you said, you know, charismatic individual with an intelligent perspective on things, bringing a whole different culture into the family. You know, it could have been embraced and it could have been a whole different thing for them, but it wasn't. And I think there's that element that when we do speak about these things, whether we're challenging our own ignorance or whether we're challenging our own biases, convictions, misconceived, ill-conceived, wherever they may come from, we still need those spaces to have those sort of conversations to be able to do that. And I think that's where we need to be able to have these kind of discussions, to be able to hear, say, ask these things at the risk of looking ignorant, but at least at the opportunity of progressing somewhat.
And absolutely right. And I would say this, let's be clear, Meghan, we as black people those of us suffering or being subjected to or witnessing racism, and I don't witness it. Maybe is it because I'm impervious to it? No, it's because when I walk, how I move, there's a self-assurance, and some might not like hearing that. Those who know me now, my job, as you know, I'm presiding over 2 predominantly Pakistani-led institutions as in a CEO capacity, associate professor in another institution, head of academic affairs from a Pakistani association, in the Middle East, running Arab institutions, and in this particular instance. And I don't look at my color, and I don't look at the color of the other individuals. I look at my role, my job, my professionalism, and the foundation of that is my deen. When someone ignorant may want to raise an issue that may remotely resemble racism and bring it to me, they see very quickly I'm not that guy. And they become embarrassed because of that impervious, impenetrable armor that I place around myself. That confidence with which I walk, that Allah has given me, and it's Allah who's given me that. So I say this, we, the people who are subject to racism, black people, anti-black racism, we don't need your support. We don't need you to do anything for us. You've got everything to do for yourselves though. Because in doing for yourselves and making yourself aware of your weaknesses, of your ignorance, of your latent bias that is feeding into that societal, community, structural racism, in you dealing with yourself, you can assist in dismantling what is being portrayed in that environment of anti-black racism. So we don't need anything from you except that you look at yourselves. And I say that respectfully to you, Wajid. I say that respectfully to all non-black people. And I say it first and foremost to all Muslims. Because if you look at yourself and you judge yourself with the Quran and the Sunnah, you will start dismantling racism on a individual basis, community basis, societal basis, immediately. So don't come saying, how can we help you? I'll turn that question back round. How can you help yourself? Because it's yourselves that need help, not us.
Sister Shabnam saying, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give the strength and iman to defend and stand with one another purely as Muslims when oppression is being faced. Ameen Ya Rab. Jazakallah khair, Sister Shabnam. Jazakallah khair. I think that's a very poignant message to sort of finish up on. And yeah, is there anything you wanted to sort of close up on, Dr. Abdul Haqq?
I think I've given enough food for thought, and the challenge has been thrown down to our brothers and sisters and non-Muslims. We've got the issue of racism is deflected outwardly to everyone else. We are just that litmus test that is happening to for you to deal with.
Yeah, very true. Jazakallah khair, barakallahu feek. Thank you very much for your time this evening, Dr. Abdul Haqq. Somebody put it up there. I think they're going to be showing that interview today at 9 p.m. on ITV in the UK. Where you are, I don't know what TV channels you have, so I can't comment at all. Yeah, Oprah interview on Meghan, 9 p.m. on ITV. And yeah, so for those of you who really want to get it from the inside of it, and I think it's important to understand the premise of where it's come from and what could have been done to avoid this whole thing. Like you said, you know, it's been the most watched thing, but nonetheless, it's come to this because of that lack of introspection within that. But that lack of introspection doesn't just exist in those people. It exists within ourselves, and it's something that we need to continually challenge ourselves and awaken ourselves to, however that might be, inshallah. Because ultimately it brings us closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You know, removing that ignorance brings you closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Removing that misguidance brings you closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Removing those bits of ego or misguidance, it protects you from the whispering of the shaitan. and the misguidance that quickly leads people astray. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us and guide us from it, inshallah. Just want to thank all of you, Sister Badriya as well, Jazakallah khair. Thank you very much for your messages there. And all of you, inshallah, who commented, Jazakallah khair. They've been coming in thick and fast, very hard to pick up. Sister Sam, Jazakallah khair. All of you who've given your salams, appreciate all of you joining in. And inshallah ta'ala, we'll join you next Monday, inshallah, at 7:30 p.m. GMT, inshallah. Heading very close to Ramadan as well now, inshallah. I don't know, but I'm feeling that tingle in my system, you know, alhamdulillah. But Jazakallah khair for all of you joining us. Barakallahu feek, Dr. Abdul Haqq. And inshallah ta'ala, we look forward to catching up with you, inshallah, next Monday, 7:30 p.m., all being well. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.